Hello, everybody, and welcome to our last session of the CFO Days. I'm excited for this one. As we're joining, you can write in the chat where you're coming in from. We've had people from all over the world joining in. I'm personally dialing in from Barcelona. Julie is also in Barcelona with me. CJ, where are you dialing in from today?
I am in Florida, United States.
USA.
Wonderful. I can see some people putting in the comments, New York, Canada. You got people from LA, California being represented, Julie, San Diego.
There we go. Yes. We're global. Look at this, Max.
Well, that's early for West Coast. Oh, no, it's 9 a.m.
It's 9 a.m. People are waking up, having a cup of coffee.
Budgeting and breakfast.
Why not? or bagels and CFOs.
Yeah.
No, but I love that one. Budgets and breakfast. That should be the name.
That would be.
We got Casey from Orlando, Florida. That's very close to you, CJ.
Shout out Casey. I'm over in Naples.
Wonderful. Let's get kick started. I'm your host, Max Bourdoir, the Chief of Staff at Abacum, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome all of you. Over the last 2 days, we've had an amazing agenda of panels and fireside chats with hundreds of finance leaders joining in and sharing their questions with us. It has been a true privilege to hear and learn from some of the most impressive operators in the finance space. Annual planning is around the corner, and this means finance teams are getting their coffee mugs ready and their pencils sharpened. But more importantly, getting ready for the uncomfortable fact that their plan will never be 100% right. Budgeting as a scale-up is never easy. One day it's growth at all costs, and the next, it's all about driving efficient growth. Which is why I'm incredibly excited for today's session and our 2 guests. CJ Gustafson is the CFO at Partstech and the writer behind Mostly Metrics, the newsletter that as a startup operator, I always turn to when I want to get a little bit smarter. Julie Jin is the director of BizOps at Abacum and is one of the most talented individuals I've had the pleasure of working with. Our conversation today is going to be split into 2 parts, a breakdown of what and how you should be running and thinking about annual planning going into 2024, followed by an audience Q&A. So please share your questions as they come in the chat, and we'll make sure to cover those towards you. Before kicking off, CJ, you're a man that needs no introduction. Please, the floor is yours.
So I'm happy to be here. I was actually told that if I put on a good show, Max would give me his secret shampoo and conditioner formula for those long locks. So I'm here for the budgeting, but also for the hair tips. So I'm CJ Gustafson. I'm a CFO by day, Series C startup, and I write Mostly Metrics by night. And I have a podcast about more fun finance and operating stuff called Run the Numbers. So anytime I can get in a room, whether it be physically or virtually with fellow operators, I jump at the chance. So thanks for having me on, Max.
No worries, CJ. Thank you for joining. And I'll share my shampoo and conditioner routine with both you and Casey. I think it's just a combination of good genes, and that's about it. And then, Julie, on to you. It's been a pleasure. We've been at Abacum for now coming up on 2.5 years. Every day is an adventure. I've learned so much about you. Why don't you share a little bit about your background with the audience today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Julie. I'm the director of BizOps at Abacum. Before, I've spent over a decade in finance and operations. So I spent 5 years at Ernst & Young, working mostly with listed companies, as well as growth stage tech companies. And then I spent some years in banking and venture capital before joining Abacum. And now here, I own our data analytics team as well as finance. So that means we cover everything from company-wide planning and budgeting to like week-on-week performance analysis and metrics.
Wonderful. This reminds me of one of the first sessions we had in which somebody said, what's the way to know if you have a modern finance leader? Are they responsible for both finance and data?
Great point.
There you go. You can use that one on Twitter now called X.
Yep. Stealing it, Max. You heard it here first.
So before kicking this session off, we ran a poll with our audience, and 50% of the finance leaders that answered are just starting out or about to start their annual planning process. I think this perfectly tees up the conversation for today. CJ and Julie, in your own words, what is annual planning and why is it so important? Julie, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, so I mean, for me at the most basic level, like annual planning is about allocating the right resources to ensure that you hit your company goals. I think it's extremely important to run an effective planning process. Otherwise, well, you waste money, misallocate resources, and ultimately risk failing to meet your objectives. And that has real business, but also human consequences, right? Like going under, having to make headcount cuts, getting fired, so on and so forth. What do you think, CJ?
I love how you brought the human element into it. I couldn't agree more. In my opinion, annual planning is kind of a forcing function to get the org in shape for its next chapter. I'm a big boxing fan, and they say that the hardest part of a fight is actually the training camp that leads into it. The fight itself is really just the culmination, and I think you could say that about an operating plan in a lot of ways, that you have to train to get the operating plan into fighting shape. And there are really three lenses you can take with planning, right? You can do your short-term planning, which is month to month or quarter to quarter. You have your medium-term planning, which is the annual plan we're talking about now. And then you have your 3 to 5 year view or long-term. And I think it's important to think about all of them as being interrelated. And annual planning is kind of just a pit stop on that journey to inform all three lenses.
I love that answer. And I mean, it resonates so true. And I think what we have to realize is that you're not just setting something and forgetting about it. It's about, as you say, CJ, always making sure that you get ready to hop on the ring. But once the fight's over, you gotta, make sure that you're ready for the next fight.
Yeah, exactly.
I also don't know how many CFOs or finance leaders in the audience are also boxers, but I know that I wouldn't want to mess with one that is.
Does kickboxing count? Yeah. So I've never been in a ring, but anyway, I digress.
You digress. So now, with that definition of what an annual plan is, then sort of this question then repeats itself every year, especially as companies start to grow. You're going to scale up, you go from Series A to B, you start layering in more leadership, you need to start building out more relationships. How should finance leaders in the audience today start asking themselves the question of who do they need to involve? And then how do they start marrying the top down and the bottom up? CJ, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so first answer is if you're doing the annual plan in like a glass room by yourself with the door shut, like you're doing it wrong. You got to get out into the org and talk to real people. I know that's intimidating for a lot of us finance folks who would rather hide behind a spreadsheet. When I think about annual planning, it should span 5 major groups, right? So you got your product or R&D org, you got your marketing and community, you got your sales org, you got customer success, and you got customer support. And it's somewhat of an iterative cycle of how you're going to work with them. It's not like, hey, I'm just going to check in with you once and like ask you some questions. It's a process where you need to go back and forth. And I also think, generally speaking about annual planning, you need to start with a great product to sell, full stop. Then you need to figure out the value proposition if it resonates with the customer and community. You need to figure out how to sell it through the sales team and position that value prop. And then you need to figure out the post-sale of where you pass to customer success. And if anything goes wrong, you got customer support. So you're approaching it from this holistic company-wide perspective. You're not just saying, hey, annual planning is where I need to figure out the quota I'm going to assign. It doesn't just stop there. You have to think about how you actually build a product, sell a product, and support the people who do the first 2 things.
I think that's a fantastic one. And I mean, for us internally, it's quite easy, right? But something that I always, when talking to other finance leaders, is one of the easiest ways of breaking that glass is go use your own product.
Yes.
And by using your own product, is you're able to understand the struggles and the challenges of the roadmap of how do you sell it? Do you have product market fit? What are the customer needs, and are you solving it correctly? Julie, how would you answer this question from your experience?
Yeah, I love doing webinars like these because I feel like everyone interprets the question a little bit differently as well. So CJ, you took it from like, oh, what are the functions that you need to incorporate? And I was like, well, like all the key functional leaders need to be involved. So I was thinking, okay, it's less about the who, because for me, it's almost like, you need to involve like the C-suite or the VP of your functional leaders, but it's like, what's important for them, right? Like, what are the two things that you need to own in the process to enable them? So for me, there's like two things that you need to work with your functional leaders, which is first, like, you need to help them understand their resource constraints and drivers, right? So they know how to adjust in the year and how to get to their outcomes. So you need to push them to like talk to their reports, give them the data, and stress test their assumptions to provide them with more confidence in their decisions. Then two, you need to bring together the codependent areas, right? Like, so it's not just you talking to sales, then you talking to marketing. It's also sitting the sales and marketing team together, because if sales is predicting a lower conversion rate, that puts more pressure on marketing, and vice versa. So it's really about bringing like the right people together and making sure that they're also getting the information that they need to get the right plan in place.
I would add on to that, Julie, that it's about getting the right people at the right place, but also helping them, and the role of finance is helping them ask the right questions. It's not only about getting your sales and marketing leaders sitting together, but it's, if we start ramping up or we hire more BDRs, what is the pipeline that then inbound needs to deliver to make up for that?
Yep, exactly.
And the same goes, CJ, I see you smiling and nodding. Is there any questions that you use to start bringing the functions together here?
Yeah, I love that Julie brought up interlocking between departments, because that often goes overlooked. I think it's like a crawl, walk, run, where like the crawl is like, I know I have to do annual planning and make a model for it. The walk is like, I have to go and talk to people within departments and collect their individual input. And then the run is I have to actually bring departments together to then have those conversations. And where I see it go off the rails, particularly, is when product and engineering do their planning in a bubble and they don't talk between each other. So to give an example, there's usually like a ratio or a pod structure that you need to get right between your product and engineering to make sure that you actually have enough people to build what you're designing and planning for. And if you follow that through line all the way, it actually goes to your P&L, because if you don't get that structure right, you don't get the product to market in time, and you don't have revenue to collect on it. So I love how Julie brought up working and almost being a mediator and the question asker, if for lack of a better term, between the departments to get them to talk.
I mean, at the end, the P&L reflects most of the business, right? So it's all about drilling through, and helping people see how each drill through starts becoming something that they are accountable or that they can directly influence. And this goes all the way from leadership even to the IC. And I think the companies that put metrics out there and share them with everybody are the ones that are often the most successful at doing this, because then everybody's looking at the same numbers and everybody's acting with the same information. Totally. Now, let's start with the top of the P&L, and that's where money usually comes in and gets counted. A big part of the annual planning cycle is understanding what that revenue target should be and what the forecast of the business needs to set. Finance and go-to-market can go back and forth on, hey, we should grow 3x, 4x, and the founders come in and VCs also have their own say. How can the business get to a revenue delivery that makes sense, both for investors and then, I guess, also the functions? CJ, what are your thoughts?
I think it's less asking yourself a question just about revenue and asking yourself more a question about how do I want to look and feel at the end of the year? And that's taking a look at revenue at the top, gross margin in the middle to show my leverage and scale that I'm actually building over time, and if it's getting better or worse, and then your income at the bottom. I think for a while we kind of fell into this fallacy of saying that as long as we're growing at the top, everything else will work itself out. But we found that you can actually grow into the ground, which sounds counterintuitive. So I think you have to take a step back and holistically say, what do I want the story that my P&L exhibits to tell to everybody else? Because if you tell a story of just revenue, it's going to look pretty wacky. You're going to have really large arms and really skinny legs, for an analogy to use there. So you want to have more of a balanced approach to saying, how does revenue inform the rest of the story my P&L is telling?
Yeah, I love that answer, CJ, because I completely agree, right? Like revenue like especially for a company that requires a lot of working capital, that can basically kill your business if you're growing too fast and don't have the cash to support that growth. I also think that we're moving towards a trend of like embedded finance, where instead of just finance, you're actually there to support the functions. So you're there to support go-to-market, but you're also there to support your post-sales team that's like, or your customer support team, that's like impacting your margins. You're supporting your product team. And it's really, in my mind, like a mindset shift, right? It's no longer about the traditional finance, just like, oh, I'm going to think about order to cash. But heck, if you're starting with like orders, you're skipping all of the operational metrics, and you're skipping all of the things that can actually move your revenue or your gross margin or your net income at the end of the day. So when I think about how you can help your functional leaders, whether that be go to market or anywhere else, it's about following that key metric.
Yeah,
like
I want to point out what you just did there, because that was fabulous. You deconstructed revenue into levers. You didn't just say I need more revenue. You're like, well, what do I pull to actually create more revenue? And that's the second order question that a lot of people fail to ask. They put this huge revenue target out there, but it's like, what are the actual tactics to get there?
Yep, 100% and 100%. And it's about like looking at the ROI of all of those potential levers. Right. And maybe you don't really know, like if you need to increase revenue, it can be, okay, spending more marketing dollars to increase pipeline, or spending more, let's say, enablement dollars to improve your sales team efficiency. And you in finance, like you have that unique like 360 view to give the functional leaders like, hey, if we're going to pull this lever, like this is how it impacts. And maybe you can also say, hey, like, I don't know which is the better decision, but let's invest a little bit of money in both and test which one makes more sense to invest in. I mean, your job as like a finance leader is basically to drive to that end financial business outcome, right? And that's not starting with finance. It's really starting with the functional leaders.
It's about how do I want to look at, if I'm summarizing, how do I want to look like at the end of the year? And what's the training plan that I need to follow? What's the diet that I'm sticking to? And who are the friends that I'm going to be hanging out with over the weekend? And then finding that little mix between the three until you get to what makes you happy and makes the rest of the business happy. That come December, you'll be like, okay, I'm like at least 90% right.
Focusing on just revenue is an empty calorie diet, Max.
Well, that's what they call vodka. It works for some. So then, CJ, you mentioned earlier around thinking strategically about product and working closely with engineering leaders. Oftentimes, this adds sort of the second layer of complexity, right? Of how do I think about the entire P&L, the uncertainty in capturing revenue, but then you also have to think about the uncertainty in building and then delivering product. Yeah. And when you're forecasting and go to market for a new feature and it doesn't hit in time, then you're sort of with that gap there that you either have to account for or have to reforecast. How have you navigated this, or how can finance leaders in the audience today sort of deal with this, what is oftentimes a reality?
Yeah, I think you look at any company and it has probably one primary engine for growth that the majority of the revenue comes from today. It's kind of your bread and butter, what you depend on to keep the business running. And then what you're doing is you're incubating secondary and third engines for growth over time. And these are kind of bets that you're making. And so we had spoken earlier about talking to engineering and product, but making them talk together. And to get more specific on the ratios I was talking about earlier, it's usually somewhere between 5 engineers to 1 product manager, or 7 to 1, somewhere in that range. And when you think in pods for the technical side of the org, it helps you staff that portion to the new engines that you're incubating over time. And so I think it's on the finance team to come up with 2 key assumptions. Like, it's not all on the product team. First, it's how much can you actually sell this product for? Like, they may not have the answer for you. You have to go and do some market research. And second, what's the attach rate that I can apply to my current product offering? So that core engine that I already have. And so the product team should help you estimate how fast you can get the product to market, assuming that you help them staff it right. But then you can extrapolate out the revenue ramp based on the average selling price and the product attach rate that you on your own kind of went and did the extra due diligence on.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, CJ. And when we think about our own like internal investments, our next big investments, it's almost doing like a market sizing exercise,
Totally.
right? Like, how big is the market for this? Like, who could we sell this to in our current pipeline? Who amongst our customers would pay for this? The resource side of it, like how long until we have it? What's the opportunity cost? But also, what are the downstream effects? Like, do we then need a different sales team or support team to support that, like new development? So again, as finance, it's about helping your team calculate like the ROI of each of those options, if you will, and then making a decision based on that.
I really like how you extended it to like, what are the downstream impacts on other teams outside of product? Like, you're totally right. If you bring a new product to market that needs to be sold in a different motion, maybe like so far you've been PLG, bottoms up, high velocity, but then you're selling like a high priced analytics product. It's like, that's great because there's a TAM for it, but like, who's going to like actually get this off the back of the truck? And you hit on that point, like you need to actually staff the sales team to then sell it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's again like tying in all the functions into one, like that 360 view, I think is where finance really needs to like.
Yeah, we sit at a unique intersection, right? Like we get different data points, and then it's kind of on us to direct the traffic based on the signals we get.
Oh, I like
the connective
that.
tissue of the business.
Thanks, I just made it up right now.
You need to start to trademark your phrases. What was the first one? breakfast and budgets.
Yeah.
Breakfast and budget, air traffic for the business, or what was it that you said?
I don't know. We're recording this, so I'm gonna make bumper stickers for everybody who attended later.
There we go. If you're joining, we'll send you a bumper sticker, and then get ready. You'll probably end up with a collection of like 5 or 10 at the rate that we're going. The one that I like to use is finance is the connective tissue of the business. And just like your own connective tissue or your nervous system, you can't carry all the workload. Like if your right arm's hurting, right? Yeah, you often like send a little bit more of your blood cells or whatever. I'm not a doctor, so I'll probably that's not accurate.
Or way beyond here.
I'm way beyond my spreadsheets right now. But then the rest of your body might suffer, right? And you'll need to catch up on some sleep, and you'll maybe get a fever. So just like that's how finance should also operate. Is finance can't carry the workload. They need to help the business carry themselves. And that's where knowing where the numbers are and where the numbers are going makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. Now, switching gears a little bit now let's talk about marketing. And the challenge with marketing, it's always, you're thinking long term, and maybe you're investing today for something that's going to generate some impact 6 to 12 months down the line. I have a lot to share here, but we'd love to hear you and CJ and Julie, from your experiences. How do you work with the marketing leader to sort of build that bottom-up marketing plan that then ties up to that pipeline contribution the business needs and accounts for also what the sales leader is putting on the other side of the equation?
Julie, go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm thinking about, the audience today, as well as the situation that we're in at Abacum. Like, we're not Coca-Cola, right? Like, we don't have decades of historical data to say, oh, like A is going to yield B. And I think we just have to accept that to some extent. So when I work with marketing, there's like 3 guiding principles that come to mind. One is, be directionally correct. 2 is patience. That's a hard one, I think. And then 3 is work hard to find your best leading indicator. So just to shed a little bit of light into what I mean by each is directionally correct means not obsessing about like the exact calculation of what's going to come out at the end, right? Like if you're relatively confident that this investment is good, then just make it. And if you're not confident, then you need to test some hypotheses and then make a decision. Patience, I think especially for a startup or, a growing company, this is hard. But certain things like building brand takes time. And this is not a pipeline tomorrow thing. And it may not be a pipeline 6-month thing. But then related to that, like to ease everyone's anxiety, you can start to search for certain leading indicators. So for example, for brand, Like you can look at social media mentions. I mean, even sales conversion rates can be impacted by a better brand. So just find something that you think is a good leading indicator and track that. So, and maybe that's just to track it and ease your own anxiety. Yeah, that's my take.
I like how you thought about like thinking in bets too, and bets to be directionally right, because I think a lot of finance people put pressure on themselves to be perfect about where, you know, the dollars are deploying are going to result, but it's really a range of success, right? Success isn't like a binary outcome, like yes or no, we hit 86 million. It's were we within the range of what we thought, and can we run the org with that range that it produced? So I like that, Julie. My I guess contribution to this question would be that when you think about building a marketing pipeline or capacity model, you actually have to build it in reverse. So like unlike your sales capacity model, which is built bottoms up, your marketing targets are going to be built backwards and then sanity checked at the end of the day in a tops down manner. So you have to take your sales target, figure out how many deals that requires, then figure out how many leads you need to get to that deal figure, then figure out how those leads work all the way down the marketing funnel, and you're essentially grossing it up over time. And quick refresher on how the marketing funnel, at least how I build it, it's pretty simple, but you have your very top of the funnel, so that's going to be your biggest number. And for that's like anyone you're trying to attract to get to know better. So widest net you can cast. Then you have what they call an MQL, which stands for marketing qualified lead. So that's someone who's engaged with your marketing efforts and like shown a little bit of interest, and they could become a customer if you treat them right. Then you have your sales accepted lead, which is an SAL. So that's like the next step in that process. It's reviewed by sales. They're like, thumbs up, this could be legit. And then you have opportunities. And that's the lead that the sales team is actually working, that we were trying to get to there when I started. And you want to get this number right and then work backwards. So then what you're doing is you're turning it into a mathematical exercise.
I love that. And then that's a lot of how we've done it internally as well. And it works, right? And connecting that back to, it's about doing the math backwards of how much you need, and then layering out that portfolio of bets of which ones are tactical, strategic, fast actioning, right? Because you got to operate in ranges, and then if sort of some of your bets are not performing as you want, then you still need to get at that number of opportunities with the range that you set for yourself. So you need to know, hey, which are the leading indicators that I can sit down with my marketing team, understand, hey, if we start net increasing our spend, what is the output that this then cascades down the funnel, and how does that convert to opportunities, or vice versa? And this is where you can then sort of, going back to levers, because we love them.
Yeah.
Think about what are the marketing levers that drive your revenue. And then that's one way of looking at it. But the other one is, what are the non-cost ways in which you can optimize the funnel? And oftentimes this is where you can also work with, you can either staff the marketing function differently or think about marketing differently. And this is a game of conversions. And often it's just talk to your customers, understand, use your own product, talk to your customers. They understand what you do. Is it clear? Can you communicate it and explain it? And oftentimes that's cheap because it's just getting to know who you're selling to. And then you have gigantic upside when it comes to, you know, helping your marketing or your sales team move the revenue figures.
Yeah. Understanding your customer intimately and what they're asking for will improve any process. I'm glad you brought that up.
100%.
I mean, go on, Julie, you were saying?
No, I was just saying 100% on the customers. Yeah.
It is scary to talk to them though, let's be honest.
That's the finance in you talking.
Yeah, sorry, I gotta get better.
So then now it's scary to talk to them, but now let's talk about people. So people make or break your culture, but they can also break your PM. Headcount at most companies is often 70-75% of cost. And more than once, finance teams have spent a lot of time trying to get their headcount plan just right. What are some of the ways in which the audience can go and keep headcount planning stupid simple during this year's planning cycle? Julie, maybe you want to kick us off, given that one of your definitions of why annual planning is so important is it should keep people at the center.
Sorry, what was the last phrase? You cut off for a second.
If you want to kick us off, given that I just at the beginning you pointed, it's so important during the planning cycle to keep people at the center I think this perfectly segues into headcount planning.
Okay, yes, thanks. So headcount planning, I mean, this is going to vary a lot and depend on, like what mode are you in? Are you in growth mode, like steady state mode, cost cutting mode? So if I think about us, we're in growth mode. So not like crazy growth in 2021, but we are hiring across the board. And to keep it simple, I always sanity check the hires with overall company strategy. So for example, if our product roadmap requires specialized skills, like you can hire there. If we need to increase sales capacity to hit our revenue targets, sure. I think as finance, like our job is to make sure that our company hits objectives and doesn't run out of money doing it. And that each person coming into the org is contributing to those company objectives, right? So if they're not directly tied, if a hire is not directly tied to hitting a company objective, like that's an automatic no for me.
I like how you tie people back to the priorities, and that's really what everyone should start with when they begin the annual planning process. Like every hire you make should be able to have a 10x impact based on the priorities you've laid out. And when I get the headcount down into like a number, what I like to do, and this is a tip that I found works, is to use max headcount figures by department. So I give each department lead what I call a budget envelope, just a fancy term. And each month and quarter has a max figure that they can build their team to. And this feels like empowering to them because you're saying, listen, I'm giving this to you, just stay under that number. So for example, by June, maybe I don't want the product team over 12 heads. And my CPO knows he can go out and hire, within a certain reasonable range, depending on the salaries, that number of people to staff the team. And if you stay under that headcount figure, like Max said, 70% of the cost, you're generally, the P&L and expenses will follow. And something else to keep in mind is to always benchmark out what you want each department at the beginning of the year to be as a percentage mix of the org. So there's only 100 percentage points to go around, no matter how you slice it. So if you want the product team to be 12%, that would mean for a 100-person company, just use round numbers, the max headcount figure for the whole year should be 12. So you're using these budget envelopes within the departments, and then it relates back to the headcount mix by percentage overall for the company to bring it full circle.
I love that, and we're getting some questions in the chat right now about headcount, which we'll get to in a little bit. Before we open up for some Q&A, let's talk about how you start putting it all together. You can see the finish line, the planning cycle is almost over, celebrations are about to start, finance wants to get some sleep, but we got to do our sanity checks. CJ, what are the sanity checks that you've done in the past that make sure that your annual plan is just right, that you want to share with us today?
Yeah, the first thing I'll do is I'll visually just look at the months and the quarters with the revenue and OpEx, and it sounds silly, but I'll just look at what the increase is visually. And if I see like that's going up 20% quarter over quarter, I'm like, well, what could drive that? Is that actually realistic? Because a lot of times you'll have your model and you'll spin everything up, but it may have some funny outputs and it may jump up and down. Another example would be if I know that headcount is increasing sequentially every month, but I see like labor go down one month, when I look at it, like that doesn't check out with what my expectations would be. Another tip here or sanity check that I always do is that I have enough quota capacity or butts and seats today to more than hit my Q1 goal. You never want to be hiring people to go out and sell stuff in Q1 that are required to hit that Q1 goal. Like you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. Ideally, I have enough people today in seats to provide coverage on the whole first half of the year. But just make sure that you're not hiring people that you need to execute on your Q1 goal, or else you're going to be fighting from behind the whole rest of the year. I have about a million other tips that I could probably come up with, but Julie, what do you get?
Yeah, I love that. So I think CJ, you covered a lot of like the let's say the I don't want to phrase it, like the operational sanity checks, right?
Yeah.
Like making sure that the maths are done correctly and like all the numbers look right and you're going to hit at least your Q1 goals. I think if I were to assume all of that is done, I have like one high level sanity check, and it's going to sound fluffy, but I think it really makes a difference, is does your leadership team buy into it? Meaning if you ask them about the plan, Are they excited by it? Are they committed to it? Because if yes, then I feel like you have empowered them to hit their goals and thus the company goals. If they're like, oh, but then, I mean, if they're not buying into it, I feel like you've already missed.
I love that, and that's how the two answers can marry each other, right? So CJ, you were mentioning you got to make sure you have enough seats in enough sellers in seats to make sure you reach your revenue goals, and you don't want them staffed during the quarter you need to reach them. The problem often is founders or CEOs are like, oftentimes a little bit more cost focused, so they'll want everybody in seat at the last possible minute to reach goals, and I think Julie's example is if you put the plan in front of everybody and everybody just shakes their heads and agrees, then that's fantastic. And if you see somebody going, maybe that's an opportunity to go and ask, hey, what are we missing for you to be convinced?
Yeah. You nailed it, Max. You nailed it.
Wonderful. So now opening up for some Q&A, we have a bunch of questions. I'll start choosing them. We have the first one going up. Casey from Florida, close to you. Doing market research for price makes sense, but can you expand on how you come up with benchmark assumptions for attachment?
Yeah. So I think a company that does an amazing job at explaining attach rate is Datadog. So if you go to their quarterly statements or their 10K or investor day presentations, they'll show basically how many customers are doing 2+ products, 3+ products, 4+ products. And what you're trying to figure out first and foremost before you even get to the numbers is this the same buyer of my initial product? So for example, if you're in the FP&A space, now you want to create an HR tool, I'm just making it up on the fly, that's probably a different buyer. So you may have the same account or customer who wants to buy both, but now you got to go sell to Joe in HR, where before you were selling to Lisa in finance. So it's a bit of a different attach rate. But you can usually benchmark as well, like how many of your customers, like if you have 1,000 customers, would even be in the market for a tool based on refresh cycles. That's what I usually look at. So like if the average tool lasts for finance or HR lasts 4 years, then I can take 1,000 customers I have and say maybe 250 of them would potentially be eligible for it. And then I would also look at how competitive the market is. And this is more of like a gut feel thing, but not all markets are the same type of competitive dynamic there.
Another question from Jessica this time. A question to CJ. If you need to raise capital, this is a popular one, we're seeing funding markets open up. For example, next year, how would you think about this in your annual plan? What challenges does this create, and how should companies think about the trade-off with fundraising uncertainty, yes or no?
First thing is to start thinking about fundraising probably 18 months out, because that gives you 6 months to start to test the market, and then at least 12 months of runway for it to materialize. It's not a decision like I want to raise money today and now I go out and just raise it. You also want to position yourself with enough time so you can raise when you're coming off of a quarter with sequential ARR revenue adds, because that'll demonstrate that your business is accelerating at scale. So there's a timing element to it as well. And then in terms of when I would raise, insider baseball on that would be that, in order to get credit for the most revenue possible, because you're usually valued off a forward 12-month revenue multiple, but investors end up looking at it as a calendar year. The best time to usually raise is Q1 or Q3, just so you can maximize the credit for future revenue that you technically haven't gotten for yet. But back to your question around how to put it in your annual plan. So first of all, put a placeholder for at least $100,000 for legal fees, may even be more. That's the biggest thing. And then what I would do is put a placeholder in the cash burn section. And I do like a simple line item thing where I have my cash burn each month. And then what you can do is have another row to add any funding that you may or may not get for that to show up as well. So like you still need a 3-statement model, but like you can do a pretty easy P&L view of it to show the impact of when that cash would come in. And then final point here is that if you're going to raise money, make sure that you put the bulk of your net new headcount additions after that. You don't want to front run it in case there's risk about not being able to raise that money.
Yeah, I love that.
Julie, anything you want to add on this one?
I think the only thing to add there was like, if you have uncertainty about your fundraising, is to definitely go with the I'm not going to get funding mode if you can, because otherwise, like CJ says, if you front load all of your hiring and then end up not having the fundraising, dead in the water.
I'm going to pick up this question that's related, and often the best way to test the water for fundraising is not only looking at your own business, at your internal business, but talking to your board. So how can you bring the annual plan? You've got that leadership buy-in. How can you then present it to the board? What have both of you done in the past that has worked?
Do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. I can go first. So in terms of presenting the plan to the board, like you know your business better than your board. Like that is a fact. So if you know your underlying drivers, then you're able to articulate those very clearly, as well as the trade-offs. Then, I mean, in the end, it's like, it's your plan, right? Like your board may have questions, but in the end, I wouldn't say that you're making a plan for the board. You're making a plan for your company, which and it's just you're giving them the outcome of that.
To piggyback on what you said, make your plan, but think through what their questions are going to be ahead of time. So it's your plan, but you have to almost get into their heads, and you want them to think like, wow, he or she knows what I'm thinking and going to ask here. And every board member, if you invest time to meet with and make relationships with individual board members, not like collectively trying to make a relationship with everybody at once, because that's impossible, but individually, you're going to know like, oh, this guy's hot topic is net dollar retention. This person's hot topic is cash burn. Like everybody has a thing. So think through the questions, but like Julie said, make your own plan.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Like tailoring the messaging for your stakeholder at the end, right?
Yeah, you said it better than me. It's like you're tailoring for who your audience is. So it's your plan, but how do I reflect this to them in words that they'll understand?
Love it.
I love it. And I think, CJ, something that often is not stressed enough is about building the relationships outside of the boardroom. And most of the important things are communicated outside of the boardroom. You get everybody's feeling for it. So when it's communicated, you know exactly where everybody stands and have already sort of checked the temperature.
It shouldn't be like you're just dropping this huge bomb on them of like, here's the plan. They're like, wait, you're going to grow at that rate? Like it should be socialized to a certain extent beforehand, or else you've completely missed the mark.
It's never like in the movies.
No, it's never like in the movies.
It's a lot of one-on-ones,
Much.
Picking up on this question from Samantha, how can finance leaders build agility into their planning process? What strategies can ensure planning is not a multi-month exercise, but that you can adjust quickly? And I think this is relevant if we look at the audience, if you're a scale-up or a startup. You're building, you're operating. You don't have time to go and sit behind your Excel for 3 months. Julie, you want to open up for this one?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, not to toot our own horn here, but, get a planning solution. No, but jokes aside, it's not a joke. If you are in spreadsheets, or even if you're not, right, like planning is 80-20. It's like you need to move the big numbers. Stop obsessing about micro details in your spreadsheet. What are the big levers that your stakeholders or your budget owners can push and pull to move and get to the outcome? It shouldn't be a multi-month exercise to do that. Like you should have, a couple of drivers in your business and focus on moving those. And then plans to be adjusted quickly. I think that's the outcome of simplification. I think, we are all very comfortable in spreadsheets and like very complicated formulas, but businesses are not that complex. Even at larger, it's like, how do you make money? How do you spend money? How do you maximize the money in?
Yeah. And if you start from a first principles perspective, like Julie said, like there's probably only three things that can severely impact the business, like immediately. If you identify those levers beforehand in the moment when stuff is going wrong, which it will, like stuff changes, then you know which of those levers to pull, which to pour more gasoline on, which to take your foot off the pedal a little bit. But I think thinking through beforehand, like, because remember, we're trying to come to like an outcome within a range that's directionally correct. We're not trying to like hit the ball to the pin every time, but realize how you can, what may go wrong and how you can move the needle in period.
I love that. We're coming up on time to wrap up. CJ and Julie, I've had a blast. We've come up with a collection of bumper stickers, and it has been a truly insightful session. Before we wrap up, CJ, where can people go and learn more about you, the work that you're doing, and the words that you're writing?
Oh, thank you. Go to mostlymetrics.com. We speak very highly of Abacum there. You'll probably see some logos. And I'm flattered that you asked to have me on. I had a blast. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks so much, CJ.
Thank you to everyone that joined us over the last 3 days. I hope you enjoyed the event as much as I did. All live stream sessions will become available next week. And I hope everybody has a fantastic weekend ahead of them.